Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics projects the employment of speech-language pathologists to grow 19% from 2022 to 2032. Yet the number of people entering the field doesn't match that forecasted demand. To help meet that need, St. Louis University is taking its Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences Scholars Program and launching a rebrand this fall that creates a path for students to complete their bachelor's and master's degrees in speech-language pathology in 5 years instead of the typical 6. Here to talk about both current and projected needs around speech-language support and what changes have been made to the St. Louis University program beyond time, we welcome Dr. Travis Threats, Professor and Chair of SLU's Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences. Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
Now, let's start sort of with a setting of the scene insofar as diagnoses and disorders go. What is the range when it comes to speech-language disorders, Dr. Threats?
The range that speech-language pathologists treat is very wide. First, we'll talk about how wide it is age-wise. So it starts all the way from newborns, especially with newborn hearing screenings, and certainly children who are born with already with the diagnosis. You want to start things there, all the way up to people who are 100 and may have had a stroke, Parkinson's, or Alzheimer's. So it's the full age range that speech-language pathologists work with.
Mm-hmm. Now, we opened by saying that there are these projections for how many pathologists in speech and language therapy and interventions, what is going to be needed and what currently exists. Why isn't it that supply is meeting demand at this point?
Well, first of all, the supply is staying steady, but the demand is going rapidly up. Mm-hmm. So that's the situation. So the demand is up for several reasons. One has to do with medical advances on both sides. So children who are born premature, many of these children didn't used to survive, but now they're surviving, and those children don't all have speech language or hearing problems, but they have a higher percentage than the population as a whole. Mm-hmm. Plus, with that population, there's been a change of approach. It used to be if you had so many problems, you just didn't go to school.
Right.
It wasn't until the 1970s that it was required that all children with disabilities even be educated. So there also used to be a time in the country that if you had language problems, which led to reading problems, and you had trouble reading, which means that, of course, the further you go in school, the more trouble you're going to have, you could drop out and you could get a good paying middle-class job in a factory. Mm-hmm. So those jobs, because they're either automatized or overseas, not as many of those jobs exist anymore. So think of an example of a mechanic. So you wouldn't have to have great language skills just to be a mechanic. But now if you're working in a garage, you're expected to enter the parts and the charge and all of that. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be employed. So society has become more dependent on jobs that require good communication. And some things like the rate of autism is very much higher than it used to be for any number of reasons. And then there's just an overall philosophical change that all children deserve to be educated and to reach their best.
Right.
And that hasn't always been.
And is that part of the reason you got into the work that you're doing now?
Well, my own brother, 3 years younger, has autism. So I was aware of the field from a very, very young age.
Right.
So that's going on at the younger age. And then about the same issue about medical advancements. People are living longer. So when Alzheimer's disease was first named back in the 1800s. It's a very rare thing
Right.
because people didn't get old enough to get it.
Sure.
Also, there's been a change because people used to, when they had a stroke, they would usually be dead within they either die of the stroke or they'd be dead within a few years after the stroke. Now people have a stroke and they're living 10, 15 years longer.
Mm-hmm.
So on both sides, the medical advancements has resulted in more of a need. So there's
Right.
kind of a moral obligation if you're going to save people's lives that you should try to ensure the quality of their life.
Sure, sure.
And that's how we come into play.
Mm-hmm. Now, those changes that have occurred over time
Mm-hmm.
because of what has happened with medical technology, then there are going to be more diagnoses,
Mm-hmm.
and then people getting to live longer. But the way that the United States looks now is very different from 40, 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there have also been challenges in attracting practitioners, or there being more practitioners who come from diverse backgrounds and experiences. How is that how has that historically been dealt with, if at all?
Well, first of all of the health professions and all the health professions are hard to get into. And they've prided themselves on being hard to get into. And they have a lot of exclusionary criterion, some of which is questionable whether it really says. So, for example, in medicine, statistically, the biggest predictor of you getting into medical school is your grade in organic chemistry. So
Okay.
you see how all of them, and they're selective, meaning that a lot of people apply and everybody doesn't get in. Some people don't get into any of the schools. So that kind of structure, which was on purpose, it was on
Right.
purpose to make them. And the reason given was, well, we want to control the quality control. These are people taking care of people, so we have to make sure they're the best people. Well, some of these criterion are not the ones that make good clinicians. So for speech-language pathology, the fact that it requires a master's degree would, for a lot of first generation and all of that, to know that you're going to have to commit to 6 years might keep you from going into it,
Right.
especially if you're wondering if you're going to get through the 4. And the field's base for practice is a master's degree in speech pathology, and it's a clinical doctorate for audiology. So they're even looking at a longer time.
Right.
So across the country, people are looking at college and college costs and college debt and realize that we're excluding large groups of people that we actually need. We need them because of these growing needs and that. And we also need them because the diversity of the people we're treating has changed.
Has also changed, right?
So much. So part of our 5-year program is to take a year off. That's a whole year of tuition less, a whole year of staying in the dorm, and one more year to get to employment. So if you add them together, that's one of the impetuses for us to start this program to help more different people be able to or think they're going to be able to do this.
To do it, right. And speaking of the length of time making the change, I'd like to introduce another voice to this conversation, someone who's currently pursuing a career in speech-language pathology and happens to have had a significant role in SLU's change to moving to the direct admit track, and that is St. Louis University graduate student Lucy Heller. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So when Dr. Threats, you were talking about the range of people who would receive speech-language pathology services, I think a lot of people sort of think about youth, right? Kids in school.
Right.
But Lucy, your decision to pursue this field is a little bit different. Tell us about that.
Okay. So I've known that I wanted to pursue a field in health and medicine since I was younger, and I was actually introduced to the field when my grandmother suffered a stroke, and worked with a speech-language pathologist after to help rehabilitate some of her language skill. And in high school, I started to look into the field a bit more, and it really seemed to be a combination of health sciences, anatomy, things like linguistics, cognition, neurology, and education, which were all things that I was really interested in. And I was looking at SLU, and the field was very appealing, and I talked to some of the faculty members, and that helped to solidify my decision to go to SLU and also study speech-language pathology.
Mm-hmm. So you decided pretty early on.
Right.
And the decision to do that, clearly you were motivated, sort of, you initiated yourself sort of these discussions with people to find out more. Did you find that information very readily available? And had you known anything about speech-language pathology before what had happened with your grandmother?
I had heard about it, but didn't know very much about it. I just did some looking on the internet, and I ended up getting in contact with a couple of working speech pathologists and was able to spend a couple days shadowing them and really getting an idea of what the day-to-day is like, and that helped me to further decide that so early on that was something that I wanted to pursue and end up staying in the program.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to staying in St. Louis, this is where you've grown up.
Yes.
What was the appeal of staying here? Was it proximity to family? And would you have gone elsewhere if this kind of program had not been available so close to home?
Right. It's definitely has been an added bonus to be so close to family, but ultimately my decision came down to really feeling drawn to St. Louis University and the atmosphere and community there, in addition to the speech, language, and hearing sciences program at SLU. And I was able to apply to the speech, language, and hearing sciences scholars program, which allowed direct admission to graduate school and eliminated that stress and step in the process later on in my undergraduate experience. So that was another factor that led me to stay in St. Louis and go to SLU.
Yeah. So what was your role in the change that was made to the program, the rebranding? Tell us that story.
Right. So I was able to, because I went to high school in St. Louis, I went to Narings Hall, I was able to take some credits through SLU as a high school student. And during my second year of college, I started to look at my schedule and realized that I could finish my undergraduate degree in 3 years. And because the speech, language, and hearing sciences program is pretty small, I was able to work really collaboratively with faculty members to configure my schedule and move courses around to allow me to finish my bachelor's degree in 3 years and start graduate school immediately after. And shortly after we figured that out, I started to work with our undergraduate program director, Dr. Sunita Thurman, and we kind of worked together to come up with a new and revised schedule that doesn't require that you've taken credits in high school, but just configures classes and moves some things around to allow students who are coming into college knowing that they want to pursue speech-language pathology. It allows them to finish the master's program in 5 years and have that direct admission into graduate school as well.
And that is something that the changes will be implemented starting this coming fall.
Right. And I want to emphasize that thing about you're going to grad school. So the other stressor is you're going to go through 4 years of undergrad, and then you got to start applying a bunch of places all over, and maybe you won't get in.
Yes.
And historically, I mean, there's some new programs, but there was a time that 30% of all people didn't get into any program they applied to. So it's a fairly historically been a high GPA required to get into it. So that's another stressor. You're going to do 4 years, and then you've got to apply all over again and hope you get in a second time. You went through that to getting into college, and now you're going to have to do it again.
Yeah.
And now there are standards. You have to keep a certain GPA in the program, but as long as you keep that, you go in. And that criterion is not as high traditionally as people who applied as a grad student. But even we, as I said, there's a certain history of elitism.
Sure.
So there's many programs that tell people unless you have a 3.8, don't even apply.
Right.
Wow, that's not a predictor of the kind of therapist you're going to be.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying, these artificial barriers, and these tend to keep underrepresented groups out of fields, especially if they go and talk to somebody and they don't seem very welcoming.
Right. Well, and also, if we look at who is currently in positions at universities who are teaching in these departments, sometimes if you don't see a reflection of your own background.
Speech and language pathology is 8% all minorities combined.
All minorities combined.
Yes. So it's only 3% Black, about 3% Hispanic. So I said some of these historical issues have been involved in that. And then I said people, frankly, haven't always been welcomed.
Right.
And I certainly wasn't always welcomed in my early time. So if you don't see people like you, they're not in the class, the faculty you talk to, they don't seem necessarily mean, but they don't seem welcoming either.
Right.
Then that will discourage you. So we, even for our graduate admissions, people who come straight through, we look at their entire record. We don't just look at them as a GPA and a GRE score. We look at their letters of recommendation. If they come in, we look at what kind of person they're going to be, because these are the things that are going to make people who can sit across from a person in some kind of distress.
Right.
Remember, we don't see somebody unless something's gone wrong.
Sure.
So your child has been newly diagnosed with autism. You have Parkinson's disease. So everybody we see is in some level of distress. Well, that takes a person to do that,
Right.
not a GRE score.
And we will pick up with that. We're going to take a very quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome back. Before the break, Dr. Threats, you were talking about ways that you were not always welcomed. Can you briefly tell us, what was maybe one of those instances, and how are things different now?
Wow, only one. There are many discouragements. A class that I got an A in, a professor actually told me that he never thought a Black person could do as well in one of their classes.
Oh, wow. And that was meant as a compliment.
Yeah.
And was that here in St.
No, that
Louis?
wasn't here.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of it has to do with, so our field started off working with, the first beginners of our field were elocutionists. They started working with speech. So there's been a big premium on the quality of your speech, and that kind of prejudice against people's speech. So to give another example, and up until the 1970s, even for white rural students, they would make them go into therapy to get rid of their Southern accent before they'd let them see clients. So there's a historical reason that you have the 8% if you have that kind of attitude. Now that does not exist anymore, and it certainly does not exist in our department, where we have, compared to other departments, a higher percentage of underrepresented students than the typical program.
Yeah. And I mean, Lisa, you've been now in the program for a couple years. You're 3, 4 now?
This is my 4th year.
4th year.
Yes.
Do you feel like some of the things that Dr. Threats has talked about, that you have seen changes sort of in the classroom, as well as in the clinical experiences that you've had?
Yes, I would say so. just in the past few years, and in my last, I've only been working in a clinical setting for a semester, but just the overall and overarching attitudes of inclusion and continuing to learn about new ideas and populations, and just create an atmosphere of open-mindedness and continued education is something that has been emphasized throughout my experience at SLU, and both in the classroom and in my clinical experiences.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that you've done some research in the field of language sample analysis, and that it deals with transcription as it deals or as it relates to diagnosis. I feel like there's a little bit of a connection to some of the things, Dr. Threats, you've talked about. Tell us about that research.
Right. So through the program at SLU, I have been able to work really hands-on with my faculty mentor, Dr. Sarah Steele, in the program. And together we've been looking at language sample analysis and ways that we can incorporate technology into making it a more accessible and regularly practiced method of testing among kids primarily in educational settings. Mm-hmm. So with language sample analysis, it's a supplemental test that we're using to help us identify disordered areas of language and parts of it like transcription. So we're listening to an audio recording of a child talking or having a conversation, and then we're transcribing it, and that tends to be pretty time consuming,
right.
Especially
we understand transcription here, yeah.
right, especially with larger caseloads. So we've been looking at the accuracy of speech to text programs like Microsoft Dictate to see if we can expedite that transcription process as a whole, and make language sample analysis something that can be practiced more accessibly and readily in school settings. And it's a great supplemental test because it allows us to really see how kids are using language in real life and conversational contexts, which is really important. And it tends to be a pretty inclusive testing procedure because it can be used across more than one language and with students from a variety of cultural and dialectal backgrounds as well.
Right. Dr. Threats, what Lucy has just talked about is one aspect of research. Is there another facet of research in your field that is exciting to you right now and sort of gets at some of the challenges that you've described?
Well, the range of research in the field is as wide as the range of clients that we see. Mm-hmm. So voice clients, stuttering, child language, cognitive disorders, acquired language disorders, head trauma. So it's very wide. But our department focuses on clinically relevant research, and that's not true in every department. You can research things. You could research somebody who's had a stroke just to find out great truths about how the brain organizes language. But all of the faculty are actual speech-language pathologists, and that's not true in every department because other people can study language and the brain and all of these things. So I would say that all the people are doing clinical work. One faculty member is looking at Parkinson's disease and how they actually function in their lives, not just how they function in a clinic setting, but how well they're able to communicate. What happens if they have that and their spouse has a hearing loss? So it's very real-life research looking at the complex issues that actually affect a person's ability to communicate not just their wants and needs, but to enjoy communication, to tell a joke, to enjoy a story, as opposed to a laboratory test where you're just trying to measure basically how deviant is the person.
Right.
So that's the emphasis of the program at St. Louis University.
Okay. And just as we close here, Lucy, you made a decision quite some time ago to pursue this field. Is there an experience that you have had that's been particularly memorable that has confirmed that this is the thing that you should do, and maybe that other people should think about joining you as a future speech language pathologist?
Yes. So as we talked about, just the range of people and settings that we're able to work in is a really, really appealing part of the field. And this past semester, I was able to do some clinical work with preschool-aged clients, which was really fun and a great experience. And I got to work with them 4 days a week, which was awesome to really see that progression over the course of the semester, and just seeing kids who come in with, a couple of words that they're saying and kind of limited language and verbal skills grow through the semester and develop these, social skills and turn taking and playing with each other, and they're talking to their parents and they're talking to clinicians, has been invaluable and has really solidified my decision to continue the work that I'm doing in the graduate program.
Mm-hmm. There's really very much language and communication and living. Lucy Heller is graduate student at St. Louis University's Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences, and Dr. Travis Threats is professor and chair of St. Louis University's Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today's episode was produced by our executive producer, Alex Hoyer.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.